We are now going to show you how to use the automatic G-carriage or garter carriage. It works on your punch card machines as well as the electronic. First of all, in threading or setting up your G-carriage, you need to plug your electrical unit into the tension rod here. Then you need to make sure that the silver guide goes over the top of your yarn. This will be plugged into the G-carriage. Make sure that at all times it will not hit your metal keyboard here, because if it hits this metal board, it will make the fuse blow. You plug it in like so. You also have a little box in the back here that has the high and low setting for the speed that the G-carriage will be knitting at. You do want to keep it generally on high unless you're working with a very difficult yarn. On the electronics, we must make sure that our G-carriage is outside the turn signal. On the punch card machines, of course, that's not necessary. You also must make sure that you have all needles working on your bed. If you have taken a needle out because you have bent it and not replaced it at the end of the needle bed, that means that the G-carriage will not work properly. So do make sure that you do keep your all needles in the needle bed. I'm going to set up pattern for my 1x1 ribbing. To set up the pattern on the electronics, it's pattern number 532. I hit the step key, clear entry, 532, step and step. On your punch card machines, you do have a punch card that allows you to do 1x1 ribbing as well. With the electronics, we have an automatic E-wrap cast-on the newest G-carriage, and in order to use that, we will hit the memo key. Now, with bringing the G-carriage across, you must hold down on the very front of, or side plate here of your G-carriage so that this stays next to the needle bed. If you do not hold down on that, what will happen will be that the G-carriage will ride on top of the needle bed and will not work for you. You will hear a very bad clanking sound and you need to start over. On the electronics, once you have passed the electric eye, you will see a G light come on here, and that means you have engaged your program. If you do not see the G light come on, take it back outside the turn signal and start over. When taking your carriage across, bring it as close to the working needles as possible. Then in setting it down, if it will not set down, that means you are in between needle butts and you need to move it just a little further and it will go down. Your tension dial is at the front of the carriage and will be set for the tension you are going to be knitting your garment at for the first row. Quite often with the E-wrap cast-on, I will take it down one tension below garment tension for a little tighter cast-on. In threading your G-carriage, you will open the gate here, place your thread into the G-carriage guide, and then close the gate. Do make sure that the yarn flows freely so that it isn't snagged on the needle. For the E-wrap cast-on, we need to make sure all of these levers are over to the extreme right side of the carriage. We program our row counter for row 1. We will hit the green key, and when hitting the green key, the G-carriage will start. Hold on to your thread as it goes across until you feel that it has actually grabbed the needles. The G-carriage will continue to move across the machine. It will not stop when you are in this setting. It will not go off the machine, but it will sit over on the one side of the machine and continue sitting there until you actually turn the G-carriage off. So once you have passed the needles that are actually in work position and know that you are free of them, then you may hit the stop key and stop it yourself. After you have stopped the G-carriage, take it over past your electronic eye and hang your cast-on comb. Now we can go ahead and remove our memo key on the electronics and on your punch card machine set up for your 1x1 ribbing. Again, we are outside the turn. We come in front of the electronic eye, now holding down on this side to make sure that our G-carriage is laying flat next to the bed, and take it over as close to the needles as possible. Then we set it down. Our row counter down counts itself. So if we set it for 10 rows, then it will down count, and when it hits 0, it will stop. We again need to change our settings at the top of our carriage. The G is for G carriage work. The C is for either casting on or casting off. We will place it over in the G setting. The next setting down is an automatic turnaround. If you leave it on the right-hand side, it means it will knit one row and stop, and you have to adjust it every row. If you move it to the opposite side, it will continue knitting until the row counter hits 0. This needs to be set in the direction that you are going, and right now is set in that direction. You will notice that as soon as you get to the other side of the knitting machine, this will move to the other side, so you always know which direction the G carriage is traveling. Once you get familiar with the G carriage, you will be able to tell when it is doing a purl stitch and when it is doing a knit stitch by the sound of the G carriage. You can leave the G carriage knitting, but always make sure, and leave the room, but always make sure that everything is going properly when you have, before you leave the room. You will notice that now that we are going back in the opposite direction, the arrow has, or the lever has moved to the opposite arrow. You should not stop the G carriage while it is actually knitting. Once it has passed your working needles, you can stop it if you want to by hitting the stop key. When using your G carriage, you can use the isolators that come with the G carriage to isolate the end stitches. What happens when using these isolators is, if you use the one that has the 1 on it, that means that the end stitch will never do a purl stitch. If you use the one that has 2, you will have 2 stitches that do not purl but do stockinette, and if you use the 3, you will have 3 stitches. They are signified at the top by an L1 or an R1 for left one and right one. They must be placed in the back of the needle bed, like so. Now your G carriage will travel across and will not make those stitches do any purl stitches. Also, when doing G carriage work and you get ready to shape a neckline, you cannot put stitches into hold as we can on our main carriage. So when using the G carriage, you either have to remove half of your work from the machine, or you can knit that half of your work back to A position with a piece of ravel cord. What you want to do is bring your needles that you will be knitting back to A position all the way forward, lay your ravel cord into those needles, and bring the ravel cord back to where the latches close. Then one by one you want to take your needles all the way back to A position, making sure that they do not come forward where they would start knitting for you. Once you have placed them into hold position, then you can go ahead and start your G carriage and knit, shaping the one side of your neckline as you go. You would move your isolator over at this point if you were keeping that end stitch in a knit stitch. Always, when restarting your G carriage, make sure that everything is knitting all right before you do leave it. because when you divided for a neckline, you may have gotten something out of line. You also have 2 small weights that come with your G-carriage. These weights are only used if you are having problem with stitches dropping. They are very light and don't feel like they would do a lot, but they really do help in the knitting. They are to be placed on your work like so, and that will help those stitches and keep them from dropping. When you have finished shaping 1/2 of your neckline, you do have to be very careful when ripping up the ravel cord, as the stitches are very large and the stitches can fall off very easily. So slowly bring these needles back into work, ripping up 1 stitch at a time.